Imagine walking into a Target or Best Buy somewhere in the United States, heading to the gaming aisle and seeing two Nintendo consoles sitting side by side. They look almost identical. One costs about $200, the other costs $300. They both play the same Nintendo games. They both say Switch on the box, and to a lot of people, they seem like the exact same console. But here's the question almost every American gamer ends up asking. Why would anyone pay $100 more for the regular Nintendo Switch if the Switch Lite plays the same games? And the answer is actually way more interesting than it seems. Because the difference between the Switch Lite and the standard Switch isn't just about price. It's about how Americans actually play games today. On planes, on couches, on road trips, in dorm rooms, and even during lunch breaks at work. And depending on your lifestyle, one of these consoles could be the perfect gaming machine, while the other could feel like a huge mistake. So in this video, we're going to break down the full comparison between the Nintendo Switch Lite and the standard Nintendo Switch. The design, performance, features, battery life, multiplayer, and which one actually makes sense for people living in the United States today. And by the end, you'll know exactly which one you should buy. And which one you probably shouldn't, because when Nintendo launched the Switch Lite, it wasn't just releasing a cheaper console. It was responding to a massive shift in how Americans play games. Over the last decade, gaming in the US has changed dramatically. More people are playing on the go than ever before. Portable gaming exploded thanks to smartphones, tablets, and handheld devices. Commuters on trains, students walking across college campuses, travelers on long flights. Gaming is no longer something that only happens in the living room, and Nintendo saw this trend very clearly. The original Switch launched in 2017 and quickly became one of the best-selling consoles in America. Its hybrid design, letting players switch between handheld mode and TV mode, felt revolutionary. But something interesting started happening. A huge percentage of players were barely using the TV feature at all. They were playing almost entirely in handheld mode, on the couch, in bed, on airplanes, on buses, during lunch breaks. For millions of players, the Switch had quietly become a portable console. So in 2019, Nintendo made a bold decision. What if they made a Switch that was built purely for handheld gaming? That idea became the Nintendo Switch Lite. Smaller, cheaper, more portable, but also missing some features. And that's where the real comparison begins. At first glance, the Switch Lite and the regular Switch look extremely similar. Both have the same Nintendo interface. Both run the same games. Both use the same cartridges. Both connect to the same Nintendo online services. But once you start looking closer, the differences become very clear. Let's start with the design. The regular Nintendo Switch is a hybrid console. That means it can work in 3 different ways. Handheld mode, where the screen and controllers are attached together. Tabletop mode, where you prop it up and use wireless controllers. And TV mode, where you dock it and play on your television. This flexibility is what made the Switch so popular in American households. You can play on the TV in the living room, then pick it up and continue playing in handheld mode without stopping. The Switch Lite, however, removes that flexibility entirely. It's built strictly as a handheld console. There's no dock, no TV output, no detachable Joy-Con controllers. Everything is built into one single device. And surprisingly, that makes it better for certain players. The Switch Lite is noticeably smaller and lighter than the standard Switch. For younger players, students, and people who travel frequently, this makes a big difference. It fits easier in a backpack, it's more comfortable to hold for long periods, and because the controllers are built directly into the system, it actually feels sturdier. The regular Switch sometimes feels a bit delicate, especially if you're constantly attaching and detaching the Joy-Cons. But here's where things start to shift. Because while the Lite wins in portability, the standard Switch wins in versatility. And for many American households, that versatility is the entire reason to buy a Switch. The regular Switch can instantly become a home console. You drop it into the dock, and suddenly you're playing on a big screen TV. That's perfect for families, roommates, or anyone who likes couch gaming. Games like Mario Kart, Super Smash Bros., Mario Party, and Nintendo Sports are built for multiplayer experiences in a living room. The Switch Lite simply can't do that on its own. You can technically play multiplayer on a Lite, but it requires extra controllers and a separate setup. And since the screen is smaller, it's not nearly as comfortable for group play. For solo gamers, the Lite works great. For social gaming, the standard Switch wins by a mile. But here's where things get interesting, because performance between the two consoles is almost identical. A lot of people assume the more expensive Switch must have stronger hardware, but that's not really the case. Both systems use essentially the same NVIDIA Tegra processor. That means games like The Legend of Zelda, Breath of the Wild, Pokemon Scarlet and Violet, and Animal Crossing run almost exactly the same on both consoles. Frame rates are similar. Graphics are similar. Game compatibility is nearly identical. So when it comes to pure gameplay performance, you're not losing anything by choosing the Lite. However, there are some subtle differences that matter more than you might think. One of them is the screen. The standard Switch has a 6.2-inch screen. The Switch Lite has a 5.5-inch screen. That doesn't sound like a huge difference, but when you're holding the console close to your face for hours, that extra screen space actually makes games feel more immersive. Text is easier to read, HUD elements are clearer, and some open-world games simply look better on the larger display. But here's where the Lite fights back, because its smaller screen has a higher pixel density. In simple terms, the image can actually look slightly sharper. So the regular Switch gives you a bigger screen. The Lite gives you a tighter, sharper display. And depending on your eyesight and preferences, either one could feel better. But this is the part nobody talks about enough: the controls. The standard Switch uses detachable Joy-Cons, which means they can sometimes feel small or a little wobbly in handheld mode. Over time, many American players have experienced something called Joy-Con drift, where the controller starts moving on its own. The Switch Lite, however, has built-in controls, and many players say the D-pad and buttons actually feel better. It feels more like a traditional handheld console, similar to the old Nintendo 3DS or Game Boy systems. But that advantage comes with a hidden risk. If the controls on a Switch Lite start drifting, you can't just replace the Joy-Con. The entire system has to be repaired, and that can be inconvenient compared to simply swapping controllers on the regular Switch. But here's where things get serious: battery life. Battery performance matters a lot more in the United States than many people realize, because Americans travel long distances. Flights across the country can last 5 or 6 hours. Road trips are common. College students carry their consoles between dorms and classrooms, and battery life becomes extremely important in those situations. The standard Switch typically lasts between 4 and 9 hours depending on the game. The Switch Lite averages around 3 to 7 hours. So while both systems are portable, the regular Switch often lasts slightly longer during gameplay. That can be the difference between finishing a long Zelda session on a flight or watching the screen go dark halfway through. But let's talk about the biggest deciding factor for many Americans: price. The Switch Lite costs about $190 in the United States. The regular Switch costs around $299. That $100 difference might not sound massive, but for students, parents buying gifts, or casual gamers, it can be significant. And this is exactly why the Lite exists. Nintendo wanted to create an entry-level Switch experience, something affordable, something simple, something that younger gamers or casual players could pick up without spending console-level money. And in many ways, it worked brilliantly. Millions of Switch Lite units have been sold across the US, especially among younger players and handheld-focused gamers. But here's the catch: some buyers later realized they actually wanted the TV mode after all. And once you've bought a Lite, you're locked into handheld gaming. You can't upgrade its functionality, which leads to one of the biggest debates in the gaming community. Is the Switch Lite a great value or a false economy? On one hand, the Lite is cheaper, lighter, and incredibly portable. If you mainly play alone and love handheld gaming, it's fantastic. But on the other hand, the regular Switch gives you far more flexibility. It works as both a handheld device and a home console. It's easier for multiplayer, and it's better for shared gaming experiences. In American households where gaming is often social, friends coming over, siblings playing together, families gathering around the TV, the standard Switch often becomes the centerpiece. But for commuters, travelers, and solo players, the Lite can feel perfect. And this debate is exactly why Nintendo sells both, because they serve two different lifestyles. Looking ahead to the future, things could get even more interesting. Nintendo is widely expected to release a next-generation Switch console in the coming years. Industry analysts believe it could feature stronger hardware, improved graphics, and possibly new hybrid capabilities. But one thing is almost certain. Nintendo understands how much Americans love handheld gaming. Portable devices are becoming more powerful every year. The rise of handheld gaming PCs and cloud gaming platforms shows that players want flexibility. They want to play anywhere. And Nintendo built its modern success around that idea. So whether the next console is called Switch 2 or something entirely different, it will almost certainly continue blending portable and home gaming in new ways. But right now, millions of players are still deciding between the Switch Lite and the standard Switch. So here's some practical advice if you're trying to choose. If you're a student, someone who travels frequently, or a gamer who mostly plays alone, the Switch Lite is an excellent portable console. It's affordable, compact, and perfect for handheld gaming sessions. If you're a working professional who wants a versatile console after a long day, the regular Switch might be the better investment. Being able to dock it and play on a TV adds a completely different experience. If you're a parent buying for kids or a family that enjoys multiplayer games together, the regular Switch is almost always the better choice. And if you're someone who just loves Nintendo games and wants the full experience, the standard Switch offers the most flexibility. At the end of the day, both consoles represent something uniquely Nintendo. They're not trying to compete with massive gaming PCs or ultra-powerful consoles. They're focused on fun, on portability, on games that bring people together. And whether you choose the Lite or the standard model, you're stepping into one of the most creative gaming ecosystems ever built. But now I'm curious, are you more of a handheld gamer or a big screen player? Let me know in the comments. And if you enjoy deep dives into the technology shaping the future of gaming, make sure you subscribe to TechVibes, because the next wave of gaming innovation might be closer than you think.